Whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name?
It's Sean Goode, Goode,
And how are you employed, sir?
at the Canton Police Department.
And how long have you been a member of the Canton Police?
17 years.
And what rank or assignment do you currently have with the Canton?
Midnight sergeant and 2 days patrol traffic.
Now, how long have you held the rank of sergeant with the Canton Police?
Coming up on 3 years.
Now, with reference to your rank and assignment as a sergeant with sort of the overnight shift, and when does that shift run from?
So it's midnight to 8. The sergeant's, the oncoming sergeant usually comes in around 11 o'clock at night.
And in general terms, if you could describe to the jury what sort of are your duties and responsibilities as a sergeant on the overnight shift?
So I'm in charge of the patrolmen that are on, that work under me. There's 4 of us on the midnight, plus myself, so 5 total. 4 on the road, 1 inside.
Turning your attention to the evening of January 28th, 2022 into the morning of January 29th, 2022. Were you working on that occasion?
Yes, it was.
Similar capacity as you've just described?
Yes.
And so the time as far as when you arrived at the Canton Police Station would be similar to what you just described as well?
Yes.
Now, when you arrived, if you recall, who was sort of working with you or under you on that particular shift?
So that evening's midnight shift, it was myself, Officer Pasquarelli, Officer Mullaney, Officer Saraf, and Officer Dever.
And as far, in addition to, let me ask it this way. So when you're performing those duties in the Canton Police Station, where are you sort of physically situated within the Canton Police Department?
We're inside the dispatch room. That's where you handle all the calls, 911 calls, business lines, stuff like that. So anybody walks in the lobby, you're right there.
And so would that also be sort of part of your duties and responsibilities in regard to being the supervising sergeant for the shift?
That evening, yes, I was inside.
Now, with reference to 911 calls and dispatch, what, if any, training have you received in regard to those?
Everybody in the Canton Police Department, we do not have civilian dispatchers like other larger departments. So every officer that works patrol has to be certified on the PSAP station, which is the 911 dispatch console. And then once you're certified, you're able to answer all 911 calls.
And what, generally speaking, does that certification process entail?
It's learning the software, learning how to know the difference between a cell phone and a landline, being able to look up when if a 911 call comes in on a cell phone. We have 3 different monitors, and you'll see that one of the monitors will be a map, and all of a sudden it'll just ping, and you'll see that cell phone. And a lot of the time, because of the location of the town of Canton, we do get state police 911 calls that are on the highway. So you have to be able to differentiate which call it is. It is actually us, or is it state police? Is it Randolph? Stuff like that. So you have to be able to read a map. It's not very hard, but it's that.
Now, beyond that, now, when people are calling into 911, they're typically calling in regard to an emergency, correct?
Yes.
What, if any, training do you receive in that certification process in regard to sort of demeanor or how to handle people on the line?
Obviously, if someone's calling in an emergency, they're probably going to be nervous. You want to just try to stay calm as possible, try to relate to them, not make them any more upset than they already are, and try to get the first thing out of is location. Where are they?
Now, with respect to calls that come into 911, what, if any, difference as far as directing the call is there between something that's sort of a medical call versus a law enforcement police type call?
So any call that comes in through 911, we determine if it's police, fire, medical. If it's police, obviously, we would handle it. But if it's fire medical, we send it to Holbrook, which is the regional dispatch for Canton Fire. So it's literally just click the button. It says fire right on the screen. That call automatically gets connected to a regional dispatcher in Holbrook, who then determines what they need, whether it be ambulance, fire, stuff like that.
Now, reference to this particular shift on this particular day, January 28th and the 29th, at some point during your shift, what, if anything, did you observe about sort of the weather outside?
When we came in, it was just very light flurries. There was nothing sticking to the ground, anything like that. We were all pretty prepared that we knew that there was a storm coming at some point during the night.
And through your work with the Canton Police Department, you familiar with an individual by the name of Brian Higgins?
Yes.
And what, if any, relationship does he have with, what, if anything, does he do for work? If you know?
He works for the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. It's a federal agency.
And what, if any, relationship does he have with your department at the Canton Police Station?
He has a satellite office in our department. He has his own scan card. You know, he doesn't have to check in with myself or anybody, but he works out of our station.
And is he the only agent, federal agent with the ATF that has space or anything at your police station?
No, I believe there's actually, could be U.S. Customs, two of them, other agents that are at work at the station as well.
Do they have sort of similar relationships as far as
Yes, yeah, they have access to the police department. You know, if Agent Higgins has worked on certain calls helped us out, whether it be a firearm case, stuff like that.
Now, on that evening of the 28th, and specifically the early morning of January 29th, what, if anything, do you recall as far as seeing Brian Higgins around the Canton Police Station?
I remember at one point during the evening, he came in. I don't remember if he came into the dispatch or if I just saw him on one of the numerous monitors we have in dispatch. I can't leave that room because I'm the only one in the building on midnight. So, but we never talked or anything like that. Didn't think anything of it. It's not uncommon.
And do you recall around what time that occurred?
I believe it was probably 1:30. Again, I wasn't looking at a clock to see. But
Now, with respect to the parking lot area of the Canton Police Station, when it comes to any sort of substantial amount of snow, what, if anything, do you do with regard to the vehicles in the parking lot in reference to that kind of weather?
we try to move all the cars that we're not using. So that would be on a midnight shift. It's any of our unmarked detectives cars, any of the patrol vehicles that aren't being used. We try to help out the DPW, which is the Department of Public Works, as best as possible when they try to plow our station. Because if not, all it ends up being is just one trail through the parking lot, and it's kind of a nightmare. So with the help of the other patrolmen, if we can get all the keys, sometimes they're not easily located, we try to move the cars to the outer edge of the parking lot so that DPW can make a good pass, and then we'll move them back over.
With regard to the vehicles in the parking lot, beyond sort of personal vehicles and the marked units belonging to the Canton Police, with regard to some of those other agents like Mr. Higgins that you talked about, what, if any, vehicles would they have within that parking area?
He had federal cars there that he used on cases, and I believe he had two. They'd be, I guess, his cruisers. They were Dodge pickups.
And then with regard to those vehicles, in regard to snow removal, what, if anything, was typically done with regard to that?
They were parked to the outer edge, so we don't have access to them. At least I didn't have access to them.
Now, working that sort of 911 dispatch area desk, at some point, just before 5 a.m., what, if any, calls did you receive around that time?
I received a phone call from a woman generally asking if we had locked up or transported a male potty that evening. It's not uncommon that people call and say, hey, did you lock up so-and-so, or did you stop anybody? She said some version of he was out with friends, he didn't come home tonight, and his girlfriend's worried about him.
At the time that you received that call, did you know who that person was on the other end?
No.
And fair to say at some point later you had responded to Fairview Road, is that correct?
Yes.
And the person who had called just before 5 a.m., did you have occasion to speak with them when you were on scene on Fairview?
I did.
Who did you identify that first call to come in from?
First call was Miss Roberts.
That would be KERRY Roberts, is that correct?
Yes.
Mayor Pro?
Yes.
So I'm showing you this. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
That would be the 911 call from our station.
And that would be specifically from Ms. Roberts, is that correct?
Yes.
I'm going to seek to introduce in the minutes of next.
No objection.
Okay. This will be exhibit 35.
Your Honor, with court's permission, I would ask to publish that call to the jury at this point.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second, please. What number? Okay. Okay. All right, thank you. I thought that's what you said. All right. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just give me, please.
Okay, please, good.
Hi, my name is Karen. I'm calling because my friend's boyfriend did not come home last night. We were at waterfall. And now she is calling me hysterical because she doesn't know where he is. You didn't take anybody up by the name of Joe. She didn't.
John O'Keefe.
Yeah, he's about to call and we'll be on foot, but
No.
he probably another guy and tapped at his own house. I don't know, but.
Yeah, no, we didn't want anybody else or anything like that. And where does he live?
He lives on Meadow, down in Pueblo.
He lives on Meadow, Pleasant. Okay, and you're where? So like home, you said he grew up?
With his girlfriend, yeah, they were out having drinks, and then she left, and expected him to come home at some point, and he never did.
Yeah.
And so, I said to her, you know, my husband had been out with her earlier in life, but then he obviously, he came home, and he kept custody with me to nephew from the parents passed away.
Okay.
And so, she's home with the niece and nephew, and they're old enough to be home, it's just, she's nervous because he never even called me.
Yeah.
So she's like, I feel like something happened, and I said, okay. Well, so probably in hospital, so you'll be having, I personally think he probably take him out to the doctor. I don't know.
Yeah, did he drive last night?
No.
No. Okay. I think, again, it's more, it would be driven by you. She would have to, call in a couple of patients and talk to us, but I mean, as of right now, it's more, he didn't get home last night, this comment, sometimes we'll have a little.
No, that's why. That's
Yeah.
what she did. He didn't tell me. That's kind of why she's more freaking out. So I figured, I called the other hospital, I said, call Canton police just to make sure, you know, that they don't want to get any police officers, anyone, Dutch people, if anybody could pick them up.
Yeah.
We get it off.
Okay.
Apparently, I was going to the party, I thought.
Yeah, no. Unfortunately, I wasn't there, I was stuck here. But we haven't really get any calls, anything like that. Nobody was arrested or anything like that. All righty.
All right, well, thank you.
All right, no problem. Good luck.
Okay,
See ya.
thank you, bye-bye.
Now, Sergeant Goode, what was played in there, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of the 911 call that you had with Kerry Roberts around
Yes.
5 a.m.? Now, turning your attention to about an hour forward, approximately 6 a.m. on the 29th, what, if any, other phone calls did you receive, bless you, in regard to the same sort of parties?
At 6:04 a.m. on the 911 dispatch console, I received a call from a woman at 34 Fairview.
Now, in those intervening sort of hour or so, as you were stating on the 911 call, no one sort of physically came into the Canton police station and reported anything in regard to this, correct?
No,
And again, the party that you spoke to on the phone at approximately 6:04 a.m., did you know that person at that time?
no,
And again, you responded later on or shortly thereafter to Fairview and spoke with a number of different people, correct?
correct.
From those conversations on scene, you now know who placed that 911 call at approximately 6:04 a.m.
Yes,
And who is that person?
that'd be Miss McCabe.
And that would be Jennifer McCabe, is that correct?
Yes,
Now, with regard to, you talked about the weather when you first arrived to your shift. Around 6 a.m., what, if anything, had changed between the weather when you arrived and around 6 a.m.?
it was snowing heavily.
Now, may I approach again?
Yes.
So, John, you went over this. Do you recognize that?
Yes,
And what do you recognize that to be?
that'd be the 911 call from Mrs. McCabe.
I'll also to introduce and admit as the next exhibit.
No objection.
Okay.
And Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask to publish Exhibit 36 to the jury now as well.
Okay.
No, this is for one, whatever it is.
Yes, I'm trying to come to 34 years old, and that is the impact out in the snow.
You're in Canton, hold on, I'm going to please go. You can get to know, okay?
Yeah, no, I did that.
It's the house, right, stay on.
I could keep them, like, 30 years after I was 15.
All right, okay, stay on, because we can.
Okay. I'm going. Where's the market? I don't think I can carry.
911, yours is.
I'm immediately and started up in the road, can't get that.
What's going on?
There's a guy on the tractor in the snow.
In the sun, 34?
Yes, 34 the hour resident, yes, I just pulled up and found it.
Okay, 34.
34 p.m. you can't have it, yes.
911 is on your order, where's your emergency? Hello?
Yes, I'm talking, you come to 34, yes, you wrote it, Canton.
34 Fairview?
Yes, it is, I mean, I'm responsive in the snow.
Okay,
He's got to here, okay.
okay, what's going on? Is he based down?
We just switched him over.
Okay. And who's that in the background? Is that some girl?
This is, girlfriend, yeah, so he's,
Okay, how old is he?
John is, 46 years old.
46, how long has he been outside?
I don't know, I don't know, he got out of the car and it could have been a couple of hours. Is he carrying? Is he? I don't know if he's breathing. There are two women trying to, it could be heat and it's critical.
Okay, can you just try asking? I know it's tough, but we have the 5 minute go and they just get it.
Okay. Is he breathing, you guys? It doesn't seem to be breathing.
Okay, do they know how to do CPR? Do they want to attempt to do?
Yes, he's got CPR. No, I guess he's gone.
Oh, okay. They don't feel comfortable doing so?
No, I think he's passed away.
Okay. All right, we have the fire department and the police department on the way. If everyone's declining CPR, then I can't. I'll hang up with you, and if anything changes, you can give us a call back. Where are you guys upset?
I'm better friends with her. I know, I'm the phone with the interviews. I know. No, Kerry, you gotta get off the me. Kerry, you gotta get off the hill.
Do you know if there's any alcohol or drugs involved?
But I'm talking hours about me, and I
Okay, is there any bleeding or anything? Maybe his head up?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, bleeding from the face. How big is the
If I could ask you just to back that up about 10 or 15 seconds or so, once the siren outside calms down.
We're fine.
Okay, bleeding from the face. All right.
Yeah.
Now, I think the full blood, if there is any.
Something coming out of the building, one of the women is doing CPR.
Okay, one moment. Is doing CPR?
Yes, that's working on her.
All right, if she wants CPR, and just let me, just give us a call back when he becomes responsive, right? But we're on the way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Cannon. And so, upon receiving that 911 call just after approximately 6:04 a.m., what, if anything, did you do with regard to dispatch?
So once it was connected to Holbrook, you could hear me. I ended up dispatching my own officers, my downtown cruisers to 34 Fairview, and then I had one other cruiser come back to the station so I could get down there.
And, so you yourself respond down there, is that correct?
Yes.
And about how much time elapsed from the time that you sort of transferred to Holbrook from the medical situation to the time that you travel down to Fairview Road?
I would guess it had to be less than 5 minutes.
And in addition to the patrol cars and yourself, who, if anyone else, did you notify in relation to that call when you?
So I phoned Lieutenant Gallagher and Detective Sergeant Lang.
Why then?
Just policy, the seriousness of the call. Lieutenant Gallagher was the off-going lieutenant the night prior, the shift prior, so that's what you usually do. And Detective Sergeant Lang is in charge of the detectives.
Now, when you left Canton Police Station to respond to Fairview, who, if anyone, assumed your role as far as manning the dispatch area in the 911?
That'd be Officer Dever.
And, may I approach?
Yes.
Dever. D-E-V-E-R. Sorry.
And for a medical reporter, if you haven't already, I'm sorry, could you just spell Officer Dever's last name if you know?
Yes, it's going to be D-E-V-E-R. You're welcome.
I'll show you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 14.
Sorry.
Okay. Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
That would be our roll call log, press log.
And as far as that particular log is concerned, is there any indication on there who sort of created that log?
Yes, that'd be Officer Dever.
And these are logs that you typically create when you're working that particular position as far as the dispatch desk, correct?
Yes, it's pretty much a running journal for our department.
And sort of how is that information gleaned and how is that sort of transmitted into that log?
It's as accurate as the officer that actually enters the information. So if it was busy in there and she's by herself, you're taking information down, you're writing it, then you have to physically enter it into a computer. So there would be a delay in time.
Thank you, sir. May I approach just to retrieve your arm?
Sure.
Yes.
Now, Sergeant Goode, with respect to your response, Canton Police Station 234 Fairview Road, what was sort of the path of travel that you took?
So I pulled out of the police station at 1492 Washington Street, taking a right onto Washington, heading south.
And then where did you go from there?
And then I took a right onto Chapman Street. And then it would be your third right on Fairview.
And coming down Fairview, what, if anything, did you note as far as sort of the elevation of the roadway as you come from the Chapman side down to where 34 is?
Coming from Chapman, you're heading downhill towards the end of Fairview that meets Cedar Crest.
And so where is 34 in relation to sort of Cedar Crest?
It's the second house on the left before you reach the intersection of Cedar Crest at Fairview.
And as you're approaching, or as you're en route between the police department and Fairview Road, what, if anything, did you observe as far as the road conditions, visibility, things like that?
It was terrible. Heavy snow, wind, visibility was awful.
And when you arrive on scene, what is sort of the first thing that you observe upon your arrival?
As I was coming down the hill, visibility was pretty bad. Obviously, I noticed the Canton Fire engine. Ambulance was already on scene. Both my two officers, cruisers were also on scene.
Now, as far as the particular cruiser that you were in on that day, is there sort of a particular cruiser that is reserved for sort of the sergeant or lieutenant who's in charge of the?
Yes. So 682 is the primary patrol supervisor vehicle.
And that would sort of shift from shift to shift as far as whoever that particular sergeant is.
Yeah, he would take the same one. 682 is it's labeled on the side of the doors, patrol supervisor.
And so is that the vehicle or that the cruiser that you took to go from the police station to Fairview that morning?
Yes, I did.
And with regard to that cruiser and sort of other cruisers within the Canton Police Department, what, if any, recording system is available on those cruisers?
All marked units have it's called a WatchGuard camera system. It has front video camera, and then it also has in the prisoner passenger back seat has a camera there as well. They should be working audio in the back seat, and they're activated by, if you flip the lights on, the blue lights, it'll automatically click. You don't have to press record. The cruiser automatically starts recording. If you got in a car accident, the camera would start recording. Any kind of impact, the camera starts recording. It actually ends up being passively recording, even when it's not on.
You talked a little bit about the audio as far as the back of the cruiser, but as far as from the camera in the front of the cruiser, where is the audio recording in regard to that, if at all?
It would be on the mic. There's a mic stand that sits in a charger. It looks like almost a beeper. Should be there.
And so that's located within inside the cruiser, correct?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Sean?
Yes.
So I'm showing you a flash drive. You recognize that?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that?
That is the flash driver for the Canton Cruiser 682 streaming.
And I'll seek to introduce in the minutes the next exhibit.
Exhibit 41.
All right, why don't we break now for lunch, Mr. Lally?
Thank you.
And you're still under oath.
Okay. All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Sergeant, resuming with what is, excuse me, just been marked as Exhibit 41, that's the cruiser camera video from your Cruiser 682 that you were driving that day, is that correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could, with the court's permission, I'd like to publish some of that video.
Okay.
Ms. Gilman, if you could start from the beginning through about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Ms. Gilman, can you pause it just 1 second? Sergeant, if you could, as the video is playing along, if you could, just alert the jury to the portion of the video where you observe yourself sort of pulling on to Fairview Road.
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could, when the sergeant does that, if you could just pause it at that. Thank you.
All right, we're coming up to Fairview right now. That's Spring, then next one up. That's Fairview right there on the right.
Pause it just then. Sergeant Goode, if I could take you back just to the right that you took just before that. What street are you on right now?
That's Chapman Street.
And was that Washington Street that you would turn to get onto Chapman?
Correct.
Can I ask you, when you're turning from Washington Street onto Chapman, are there any sort of businesses or sort of landmarks on your right or your left as you're making that turn?
So on the right-hand side, as you're turning onto Chapman, that's going to be Cassie's Corner Store. And on the left at the intersection is, it used to be called Temple Beth Abraham. I believe it's Temple Bin Bar something. I don't know the actual name, but.
So there's a temple on your left and Cassie's on your right?
Correct.
And so at this point in the video here is about when you're about to turn on to Fairview, correct?
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if you could. Can I take the pause right there? May I approach the witness, Sean?
Yes.
It was repelled.
So, sir, sorry, there's a pointer.
Oh, okay.
If I could, Sergeant, just ask you to, within this sort of still frame up here on the screen, do you recognize people that are depicted within this still frame of this video?
Yes.
And if, to whatever extent you do recognize people, if you could, using the laser pointer, draw the jury's attention to whom you recognize.
All right. That's going to be myself. Right there is going to be firefighter McLaughlin. That's going to be Miss Reed. And if you played it another second, I believe that's going to be Miss McCabe, or if not, Miss Roberts.
Ms. Gilman, if you could. Ms. Gilman, the gentleman you see sort of behind you in the frame, Sergeant, do you recognize who that is?
Yes, that's Officer Sarif.
My apologies, Ms. Gilman, you can run. You can take that down. Thank you very much. And so, Sergeant, you arrive on scene in that area. First of all, what's contained in that video? Is that a fair Niagara Trail, what you observed as far as the weather conditions outside that day?
Yes.
And when you arrive on scene, who, if anyone, is it that you speak to first?
Initially, I walked up to Officer Sarif. I said probably some version of what's going on. Officer O'Keefe was already in the ambulance, and then I just began to try to talk to anybody and anybody.
And so the ambulance is still on scene when you arrive, is that correct?
Yes.
Officer O'Keefe is in the back of the ambulance, is that correct?
Yes.
And at some point when you're speaking with Officer Sarif, does he direct your attention to where Officer O'Keefe was prior to being placed in the ambulance?
Yes.
Where did you direct her attention?
If you're looking at the house, it'd be left-hand side, slightly probably right in front of the flagpole.
And about how far off of the roadway would you estimate that was?
I would say 8 to 10 feet off the curb.
Speaking to other people without reference to necessarily what was said to you, following your conversation with Officer Sarah, who, if anyone, you speak to next?
I believe the first person I could really get a statement from was Miss McCabe.
And when you say first person you could really get a statement from, what do you mean by that?
It was a chaotic scene. People just kind of walking in and out. And so Miss McCabe was the first one that was able to give me a good statement of how they ended up here.
Following your conversation with Miss McCabe, who, if anyone, do you speak to next?
Next was Miss Reed.
And just to be clear, when we speak about Miss Reed, you see her in the courtroom today?
I do.
Just identify her as where she's seated or an article of clothing she's wearing.
She's sitting between Mr. Jackson and Mr. Yennetti.
I'll just ask the record to reflect identification. Identify the witness.
Okay.
Now, when you're on scene and you're speaking to these individuals, what if any impact did the weather have as far as your ability to sort of hear things that weren't direct conversations you were involved with?
You couldn't hear. It was oddly eerily quiet, but the wind was so howling that I had a tough time actually hearing people. So you had to speak very loud or get next to each of them.
And as far as your conversation with the defendant, Ms. Reed, what, if anything, did you ask her, or what, if any, response did she give?
So I walked Ms. Reed to the back of 682. She was obviously cold. Got her in the back of the car, put the heat on, asked her, how did she end up here? How did her boyfriend end up here? She says, I don't know.
Prior to placing her in the back of the cruiser, how would you describe her sort of demeanor outside?
Confused, hysterical, shock.
What, if anything, was she saying or asking in regard to Mr. O'Keefe prior to you putting her in the back of the cruiser?
She was yelling out, is he dead?
And is that something she said once, more than once, or something?
Numerous times.
About how loudly was she saying?
Oh, she was yelling it.
And so once back in the cruiser, you asked her some questions after she said, I don't know. What, if anything, else did you ask her that?
I asked her if she had driven there, and she said, I think so. And then right after that, she said, I don't remember. Because of her state, I decided to stop questioning there. She couldn't keep her train of thought.
Now, you had notified Detective Sergeant Blank and Lieutenant Gallagher prior to your going to the scene, is that correct?
Yes.
About what time was it that either or both of them arrived?
Detective Sergeant Lang probably got there at about 6:20, 6:25. I immediately briefed him what we had, what was going on so far.
And about what time did Lieutenant Gallagher arrive?
I believe Lieutenant Gallagher probably came in right around 7 a.m.
Now, following your conversation with the defendant, or if anyone else did you speak to on?
Then I spoke to the other party, Miss Roberts.
If you know, about how long a period of conversation are we talking about with respect to Ms. McCabe and Ms. Roberts?
Each interview,
Yes.
a couple minutes.
And why was it only a couple minutes?
It was a pretty quick statement. It seemed like they were only in the car for a very short amount of time.
Move to strike.
All right, so we'll strike after. It was a pretty quick statement. Next question.
Now, with regard to Lieutenant Ms. Reed, after you had that brief conversation with her in the back of your cruiser, where did you go from? Where did she go from there?
I believe she, at some point, we let her back outside of the car. We never closed the door on her because I was stood in the door frame with my head in the back seat. She got out. She kind of just did her own thing, paced up and back between talking to either Miss Roberts or Miss McCabe, yelling out.
And at some point, did the ambulance and Miss Officer O'Keefe was in, did that leave the scene?
It did.
And following that, what, if anything, did you say or do with reference to the defendant, Ms. Reed?
Once the Officer O'Keefe was transported. Miss Reed just was not listening to any directions. We were trying to keep her in Miss Roberts' car to stay warm. She's going back and forth. I finally told Miss Roberts, we have everybody's information. She's not needed here anymore. Go home, get warm. We'll reach out if we have to.
And shortly after, and at that point, did Ms. Roberts take Ms. Reed?
She did.
And what, if anything, happened next on scene with regard to Ms. Reed?
It was moments later, I got a radio transmission from our officer at the working dispatch that Mr. Reed, her father, was on the phone with Miss Reed, and she was making suicidal threats to take her own life.
And based on that information that you received, what, if anything, did you do in regard to that?
Well, once our Officer Dever, who didn't even know that we had Miss Reed at the scene, she radioed to us to confirm that did we have a Karen party on scene. I said we did. She explained that her father was frantic on the phone, and Miss Reed was stating that she wanted to end her life, and he, in quotes, said he wanted her to be in protective custody. So at that time, I knew that we'd be able to get a hold of her because I had all the information. I believe I just called Ms. Roberts' phone, told her to bring her back to the scene.
And about how long was it after you spoke to Ms. Roberts that they returned to the scene?
They couldn't have gotten very far, especially in the road conditions.
Then based on those statements that were reported to you from the dispatch from defendant's father, what, if anything, did you do with regard to Ms. Reed?
I told Officer Mullaney, who was on scene, most of our patrolmen have, it's called Section 12 paperwork inside of all of our cruisers, just for that reason. I advised him to fill out the proper paperwork, and we were going to section Miss Reed to the hospital for mental evaluation.
And what is the Section 12 from your perspective?
It's a tool for police officers when you come on scene with someone that's having either a mental breakdown, claiming that they want to hurt themselves, anything like that. We have the power as police officers to fill out the proper paperwork. We're not medical professionals. Let a doctor determine if she does need medical help. And if she doesn't want to go, or him, that paperwork allows us to actually physically put her on a stretcher and send her to the hospital. Once she gets to the hospital, it's up to the doctors there to do their due diligence, and if they deem that she's not mentally unstable, then she's released, but at least it's off of us.
Now, the time that Ms. Reed returns to the scene, the fire department, being the ambulance and the engine, have already left. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And then point to apparatus from the fire department come back in reference to Section 12.
Correct. So I believe this group was from Station 2, which is the other fire station in the town of Canton. They arrived on scene.
And during that time in between, who arrives first, the fire department or Ms. Roberts with Ms. Reed?
Miss Roberts.
And during that time, after Ms. Roberts arrives with Ms. Reed and prior to the fire department arriving, what, if any, interaction did you have with Ms. Reed during that time?
None.
And then once the fire department returns on scene, what, if anything, do you direct them to with regard to Ms. Reed and with regard to the paperwork you had Officer Mullaney fill out?
Officer Mullaney and Officer Sarif, and looks like in the video, escort Miss Reed to the ambulance, and she's safely transported to the hospital. Our officer back at dispatch called back Mr. Reed, advised her that his daughter was safe.
And then turning back to the scene, following Detective Sergeant Lang's arrival, where, if anywhere, did you and Detective Sergeant Lang go on scene following that?
So when we were waiting for the fire truck to arrive, we noticed that the lights went on at 34 Fairview. We needed to obviously speak to the homeowners. I told Sergeant Lang at the time, I believe he was on the phone with CPAC for the state police. I said, the lights just went on the front door. Let's go speak to the homeowners. And we both walked in.
You actually physically walked into the house, is that correct?
Yes.
With respect to prior to you seeing sort of the house lights go on at 34 Fairview, had you seen anybody go into or out of that residence while you were there?
Yes. At some point, either myself or Sergeant Lang told Ms. McCabe that she needs to wake up the homeowners. We need to speak to them.
And why did you say that specifically to Ms. McCabe?
We have no idea why John O'Keefe is laying on the front lawn of a house. We have no idea. The statements from the three people, we need to figure out what happened that night.
And so I guess my question is more why Ms. McCabe versus somebody else?
Ms. McCabe is the sister-in-law of the homeowner, so she would be a friendly face to knock at the door at 6 o'clock in the morning in a blizzard.
Now, beyond anybody at 34 Fairview Road, again, before you observe those lights go on in residence, from the other houses sort of on the street up and down, who, if anyone, did you observe come out of any of those houses?
Nobody.
And was that something that you believed about the time that you were on scene?
Correct.
So how long were you on scene for in total?
Looking at the log, we were there for almost exactly 2 hours.
And so during those 2 hours, no one from any of the houses on the street came outside?
No, I mean, every emergency truck that showed up at 6 o'clock in the morning during a blizzard, there's no other cars on the road, so you're not coming down with sirens blaring, waking up an entire street, a neighborhood. There's no need for it. So it was just lights and flashing, and to be honest with you, you couldn't see very far. You know.
So you and Detective Sergeant Lang go into the home at 34 Fairview, and who, if anyone, did you speak to in there?
Mr. Albert, Mrs. Albert, Brian, and Nicole.
And who, if anyone else, was present in the home when you spoke with them?
When I was in there, I know Jen was in there, but we didn't speak to her because we already spoke to her, but we just spoke to Brian and Nicole right in the front room.
Now, you heard over the course of the 911 call from Ms. McCabe that she references that 34 Fairview is the Albert residence, correct?
Yes.
And did you know Brian Albert, or were you aware of who he was prior to going to the house that day?
I know of Brian Albert, yes.
And how did you know?
He's a brother of a coworker that I've worked with for 18 years.
And co-worker that you worked with for 18 years, who's that?
Detective Albert.
What's his first name?
Kevin.
And had you ever been to that house before?
No.
You ever been inside that house before?
No.
And when you go inside that day, it's Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, and Ms. McCabe, is that correct?
Yes.
And during the time that you were in there, do you recall seeing, or who, if anyone else, do you recall seeing in there besides those three people, yourself and Detective Sergeant?
Nobody. Detective Lang took the lead on speaking to Brian and Nicole Albert, and I kind of just moseyed in the front of the house, looked in the dining room, and listened to what they said, what happened. They seemed like they were generally in shock that there was a
Objection.
Sustain. Next question, please.
What, if anything, did you observe about their demeanor when you spoke?
They looked like they just got woken up at 6 o'clock in the morning.
And as far as you indicating that you're sort of looking or poking around the front area near the front door, correct?
Yes.
And what, if anything, of note did you observe inside the house when you did that?
Nothing. Everything to be in order. It seemed like a normal house.
And following, if you know, about how long was that conversation in the house?
I would say 20, 25 minutes.
And following that conversation, where did you and Detective Sergeant Lang go?
At that time, we both left the residence, came outside, and at that time, Lieutenant Gallagher was arriving. We had like a little bit of a powwow, figured out what was going on, and I believe that's when we saw Jen McCabe's husband show up and walked in.
And again, you didn't know Jennifer McCabe prior to that day, correct?
No.
Did you know her husband prior to that day? So after you saw her husband, who you now know to be your husband, walk in, what, if anything, did you and Detective Sergeant Lang?
Sergeant Lang ran back inside to get a statement from Mr. McCabe as well.
Did you go with him as well?
I did not.
And after you have sort of the conversation between yourself, Detective Sergeant Lang, and Lieutenant Gallagher, what, if anything, did you, the three of you do from there?
Lieutenant Gallagher immediately said we need to seal off the area of where Officer Keith was located. We grabbed some crime scene tape, put around. He wanted to photograph the area as well.
And who, if anyone, grabbed the crime scene tape?
Myself.
And what, if anything, did you do with it?
I wrapped it around probably the flagpole, tree, and cruiser. It was hard to keep up just because the wind was blowing at such a good rate.
And then what, if anything, did you and the other officers do with respect to the area that was identified to you as where Mr. O'Keefe was on Officer Sarah's ride?
Lieutenant Gallagher noticed that the snow was coming down at such a good clip, we couldn't keep it clear, and made the idea of anybody have a leaf blower, and I did. So I told him I'm not too far away from the house, so I shot back to my residence and grabbed my own.
And about how long a period of time was it between the time that you sort of left to go get the leaf blower and the time that you arrived back?
No more than 5-7 minutes.
And once you arrived back at back in the area of 34 Fairview Road, what, if anything, happened there?
I started it up for Lieutenant Gallagher. He took it over, and it worked great.
Now, with respect to that sort of implementation of the leaf blower, what, if anything, did you or other officers do to sort of memorialize?
So as Lieutenant Gallagher was using the piece of equipment, I used my iPhone, videotaped it, and took 2 still photos.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I actually don't need to. Ms. Gilman, if I could have exhibit number 33 up on the screen. Just the first one. Sergeant Goode, have you seen what's up on the screen as Exhibit 33 before?
Yes.
And what do you recognize as?
That's Lieutenant Gallagher.
And what, if anything, does Lieutenant Gallagher have in his hand at the time in this particular case?
The leaf blower?
And what's depicted on the screen, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you memorialized on scene that day with respect to the leaf blower?
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if you could just run just this one video. If you just pause it right there. Now, with respect to using that leaf blower on scene, Sergeant, what, if anything, did you observe in the snow when that was used to blow away sort of the layer of the snow?
It exposed the blood and small drinking glass broken.
And do you see those items in what's frozen up on the screen right now?
I do.
If you could, using that laser point, direct the jury's attention to where you observed each of those items in this video.
So that's the glass right there, and then all the blood droplings.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Gilman. You can take that. Now, prior to using the leaf blower, what, if anything, did Lieutenant Gallagher instruct you and any other officers to do with regard to your cruisers that were parked on scene?
We needed to move them out of the way. He wanted to be able to get a good shot of the area, so we kind of closed off the road. And
Ms. Gilman, if I could have Exhibit 41 back up again. Yeah, Ms. Gilman, if I could ask you to fast forward on this to about 40 minutes and 30 seconds into. You could pause it right there. Now, Sergeant Goode, what's up on the screen, is that the point that you are referencing now as far as about to move your cruiser for that purpose?
This was early when we moved out of the way of the ambulance, I believe.
Fine.
Nope, could be right.
Regardless, you recognize this to be...
Yes, sorry, if you just play forward, I'll know.
I'm sorry, can you?
Just play forward, I guess.
Ms. Gilman, if you could, I'd like to play this through to about 41 minutes and 12 seconds or so. But if you could just pause it real quick, I'm sorry. Sergeant, at some point when you move this cruiser, what, if anything, you're able to see in this footage of the front lawn area of 34 Fairview?
So my cruiser camera pans the front yard of 34 Fairview, and it shows the snow undisturbed. No footprints, any tracks, anything like that leading anywhere.
And if you could just speak up when we get to that point, and Ms. Gilman, if you could just pause it on that area. Pause it right there. Now, the area that you were speaking about before, is this sort of the portion of the video?
Yes.
And using the laser pointer, if you could direct the jury's attention to the portion of the yard that you were talking about in indication of no footprints or anything that you observed in that spot.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Gilman, if you could just let it run through for a couple more seconds. Thank you, Ms. Gilman. You can stop. And Ms. Gilman, you can take it down. Now, Sergeant Goode, you had spoke about as well some photographs that were taken to memorialize the area of where Mr. O'Keefe was found. Is that correct?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 8. First, just if you recognize it.
Yes.
And what do you recognize that?
That is 34 Fairview.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have Exhibit 8 up on the screen. What's up on the screen, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed on scene that day?
Yes.
If I could ask you to flip forward in that book before you to Exhibit number 10.
Okay.
And Ms. Gilman, if we could have Exhibit 10. And Sergeant, what's up on the screen, is that what you have before you with Exhibit 10?
Yes.
And similarly, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that?
That is a scene where our officers and the witnesses found Officer O'Keefe.
And if you could, using that laser pointer you have before you, direct the jury's attention to where you were directed to where Mr. O'Keefe was found.
Objection, hearsay.
No, I'll allow that.
Go ahead, sir. Now, sir, if I could ask you to flip forward in that book just a little bit more to what's been marked as Exhibit 20A. if I could have that exhibit on the screen as well. And do you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 28?
Yes, that's the curbing.
And as far as the curbing is concerned, how is it sort of cleared off in this particular area?
We had to kick it off with our shoe to clear it off so we could actually see it, make a mark of it.
And again, that area that you were directed to, as far as where Mr. O'Keefe was found, you observed that in this photograph, Exhibit 28 as well?
Yes.
If you could, using the laser pointer before you, direct the jury's attention to where in this photograph that is. Thank you. Now, may I approach this to,
Yes.
and lastly, I'm just going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 27. Sergeant, do you recognize that?
I do.
Ms. Gilman, if we could have 27 on the screen. And Sergeant Goode, what's up on the screen as, and before you as Exhibit 27? Sorry. What's up on the screen, is that what you have before you as Exhibit 27?
Yes.
And if you could describe to the jury what we're looking at in this.
So we have the blood, and then right here is the broken drinking glass that was located.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
May I approach just to retreat?
Yes.
If I may have just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
Following your time on scene that morning, sir, where did you go from there?
Once we cleared 34 Fairview, I returned to the Canton Police Department.
And the items that you were talking about as far as the blood, which you believe to be blood droplets in the snow and the piece of the cocktail glass, what, if anything, did you or other officers do with regard to that?
Overruled.
Go ahead.
Detective Sergeant Lank transported those back to the police department.
Again, just one moment, Your Honor.
Okay.
I have nothing further for this witness, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Yannetti?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Sergeant.
Afternoon.
Sir, you and I have never met, correct?
No.
We've never spoken.
No.
Sergeant Goode, you grew up in Canton?
I did.
You attended Canton Public Schools?
I did.
You graduated from Canton High School?
I did.
That would have been in 1998?
Yes.
Is it true that in your graduating class was somebody named Courtney Proctor?
Yes.
You knew Courtney Proctor?
Yes.
You knew her to be Michael Proctor's sister, correct?
Yes.
Also in your graduating class was somebody named Jill Daniels, correct?
Yes.
You knew her, or you now know her, to be Christopher Albert's sister-in-law, correct?
Yes.
Christopher Albert is married to Jill Daniels' sister, correct?
Yes.
And you know Christopher Albert as Brian Albert's brother, correct?
Yes.
So it is fair to say that you graduated high school with Michael Proctor's sister and Christopher Albert's sister-in-law, correct?
Yes.
And, growing up in Canton and, working for 18 years as a Canton police officer, you're well familiar with the Albert family of Canton, correct?
I work with one of them.
You know that the Albert family is a well-known family in Canton, correct?
Sure.
The Albert family is well connected to the town of Canton, correct?
I don't know what you mean by connected. They live in Canton. Yes.
All right, well, Christopher Albert is a Canton town selectman, is he not?
Yes.
And you've already established that Kevin Albert is a Canton police officer, correct?
Yes.
And you already testified that you knew Brian Albert as well, and you knew that he was a Boston police officer who lived in Canton, correct?
Yes.
In fact, he and his family lived at 34 Fairview in Canton, correct?
Yes.
You also knew that his family had been there for years. Before Brian Albert owned the house, his parents owned it, correct?
Yes.
Now, as of January 28th of 2022, who among the Albert family did you know either personally or professionally?
Professionally is Kevin Albert.
Okay, and what about personally?
I knew Chris.
And you know that Christopher Albert, in addition to being a town selectman, also owns a pizza place in Canton, correct?
Yes, he does.
What's the name of that pizza place?
That'd be D&E.
And have you eaten there before?
Yes,
You've seen Christopher Albert there before?
I have.
Now, on January 29th of 2022, you learned at approximately 6 a.m. that John O'Keefe's body was found on Brian Albert's front lawn, correct?
Yes.
And as of January 29th of 2022, you knew that Brian Albert at that time, of course, was the brother of your fellow Canton police officer, Kevin Albert, correct?
Yes.
And how long have you known Kevin Albert for?
As long as I worked at the Canton Police Department.
And that is approximately 18 years?
Coming up in 18 years, yes.
And is Kevin Albert older or younger than you or around the same age?
He's older than me.
By how many years, if you know?
I don't. Probably
Approximately?
5 years?
Have you ever shared a patrol car with Kevin Albert?
No.
Have you ever worked on an investigation or a case with Kevin Albert?
I probably have, yeah.
In addition to being a colleague, would you also consider Kevin Albert to be a friend?
Yeah, we've socially hung out after work.
And because he is a fellow Canton police officer, you'd expect that he would have your back in a crisis, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
No, I'll let him have it.
I hope he would defend me while working. Yes, he's a police officer.
You would certainly protect him in a crisis, correct?
At work, when we're police officers, yes.
Sure. Well, even out of work, if he was in a crisis, you'd probably help, correct?
I don't know what you're asking.
Well, there is a teamwork that is part and parcel of being a police officer with your fellow officers, correct?
Sure.
It's a dangerous job.
Sure.
You need to have each other's back.
Sure.
You need to depend on your fellow officers, correct?
Sure.
And it's been said there's a brotherhood among police officers, correct?
To a fact.
And, when you meet another police officer, he or she will tell you that they're, quote, on the job, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
The objection sustained.
And in terms of, depending on your fellow officers, you're taught all this beginning in the police academy, correct?
Objection.
No, he can have that.
What am I taught?
Well, I'm asking you. With regard to the teamwork and, having each other's backs and, working together and depending on each other, you're taught that starting in...
Sure.
And it's reinforced over the years by superior officers and your colleagues, correct?
Sure.
Now, you were assigned as the primary investigator in the reconstruction analysis for this case, correct?
Assigned as the what?
You were assigned as the primary investigator in the reconstruction analysis for this case?
I don't know reconstruction analysis. No, I was the patrol supervisor that day.
If I may just have a moment, Your Honor.
Okay.
May I approach?
Yes.
I'm going to show them the whole thing. Directing to page 5. With that line. Now, I'm going to show you what is, not sure how many pages, but there are quite a few.
Okay.
It's a,
Your Honor, if he could not describe what he's showing to the witness and
Yeah,
just
just
show
go
it to
ahead
him.
and show it to him.
sure. I'm going to direct you, I'm taking out the first 4 pages and directing you just to the 5th page.
Okay.
And specifically the 2nd paragraph, and it's numbered number 2.
Okay.
And I will ask you if you've seen that before.
Okay.
And I'll take it back from you.
Okay.
Do you,
Sure.
thank you. Do you recognize what this is?
Looks like some state police form.
Okay. Is it a
Why don't you not ask him? He just answered what he thought it was.
are you familiar with a collision analysis and reconstruction section, a CARS report?
I know the state police has a cars section that handles motor vehicle homicide.
Does this appear to be a CARS report?
I've never seen one. You just showed me one. I'm not in the state police.
But you did see that your name is listed in the paragraph that I pointed out to you,
Sure.
and you're listed as Sergeant Sean Goode, that's you, correct? Of the Canton Police. And were assigned as the primary investigator in this reconstruction.
Because I wrote the offense report from that day.
Well, I'm just asking you. I'm dealing with a state police report that lists you as the primary investigator with regard to the reconstruction.
Objection, Your Honor. May we approach?
Sustained. Sure, why don't you all come up for a minute? Bring that, please.
Sergeant, you are familiar with the key swipe system at the Canton Police Department?
Yes.
Could you explain to the jury how that works?
So police officers are issued looks like a credit card. I have it in my wallet. Anytime I enter or leave the police department, the exterior doors going out the back there's a key scan. You put it up to it to unlock the door to come in. When you leave, you don't have to go in, but if you need to go into the booking area, you have to scan yourself in and out. And to get out of the sally ports, you have to scan in and out.
Okay, and just trying to keep your voice up so that
Yes,
these
sorry.
last few jurors can hear you. How many officers on your department have those keys that can be swiped?
I would believe all of them.
Okay. And how many, or strike that. Do you know how this information is stored at the Canton Police Station?
I do not. I don't know the software, but I believe it's recorded anytime we would come and go.
Okay. And you say you believe that it's recorded at the time that the information is obtained? In other words, somebody key swipes in and that information is then stored, you believe, at the Canton Police Station?
I don't know the software, so I wouldn't be able to give you an educated response to that.
And
Not sure.
do you yourself, as a sergeant, have access to the key swipe data, or is that limited to certain officers at the department?
I don't believe I have access to that. I've never accessed
You've
that.
never accessed it. Okay. Your Honor, we do have a stipulation between the parties, if the court will accept it, to introduce the key swipe records from January 29th of 2022.
Okay.
I would offer that as the next exhibit.
Any objection, Mr. Lally?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Are they subject to redactions?
Yes, we have redacted them. The court can certainly take a look to make sure that,
Have you all agreed to the redactions?
May we approach Justice to that?
Yes.
before you now took the stand today, did you go over your report?
My police report?
Yes.
Yes.
Were you looking for anything specifically?
No.
How long did you take to review that report between yesterday and today?
I scanned over it.
A few minutes?
Sure. Yes.
Have you spoken to anybody about your report?
No.
Nobody from the Canton Police?
No.
You recall that I had asked you about the fact that one name had not been completely spelled out in terms of first name, right?
Yes.
And you had, I believe, indicated that Sergeant Blank was the one that altered that or added that to the report.
Not altered. So he was the one that got those names. So when he entered his report, I believe he would enter those.
Okay, and so he entered that into your report, correct?
Anybody writes a supplemental, if you have the authorization, can enter who you speak to add those names. I only spoke to Miss Roberts, Miss Reed, and Miss McCabe that morning.
Okay, but the report has your name on it, correct?
Yes.
Did you speak to anybody from the prosecution, either Mr. Lally or Ms. McLaughlin or anybody else from that office about this issue?
No.
You would agree with me that it is important when you're writing a police report to be transparent, correct?
Yes.
You want to be clear, correct?
Yes.
You do not want to mislead the reader into believing something that is not true, correct?
Yes.
Could I see P and Q for identification, please? Thank you, sir. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm showing you first P for identification. You identified that yesterday, correct?
Yes.
We went over with the jury the 5 bits of information that are up at the top of the report, starting with the incident number, correct?
Yes.
You had indicated again, incident 22-87-OF,
Yes.
call 22-449,
Yes.
date and time reported January 29th of 22 at 6:08.
Yes.
And the report date and time was January 29th of 22 at 8:24 a.m., correct?
Yes.
Reporting officer, Sergeant Sean Goode, correct?
Yes.
I'd like to show you now what has been marked Q for identification. And you can hang on to P if you like. With regard to those bits of information, oh, first of all, let me have you identify Q for identification. I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm reading Q.
Okay, what is Q for identification?
Exhibit Q.
Right. What is the actual document?
We call this a face sheet.
Okay. And with regard to P for identification, that's also a face sheet, correct?
Yes.
They appear to be nearly identical, correct?
Correct, except I'm looking at the top right corner. One says 1/30/2022, and the next would be 10/25/2022.
That is the print date of the report, correct?
Okay. I don't know.
So regardless of when those 2 face sheets had been printed, ignore that. With regard to the information about the incident number and the date of the report and the date of the incident and the reporting officer, those appear to be identical, correct?
Correct.
Now, with regard to P for identification, which is the first report that you were shown, and you were shown that yesterday, and now you have it in front of you, There is a photo on the right side of that report, is there not?
There is.
Do you know what that photo is of?
It looks like the scene probably a couple days later when the snow had melted.
Okay. Does it look like a berm that was actually
Exposed?
uncovered by the officers on scene the very first day?
Yes. Are we looking at Q?
No, at
At P? Yes. P? Yes. It looks like the berm. Correct.
And then with regard to Q for identification, which again is the face sheet with the identical information, is there a different photo?
Yes.
What does that photo appear to depict, if you know?
It looks like the same area that Mr. O'Keefe possibly was found, I believe.
All right. Those two documents, P for identification and Q for identification, those are actually your report, correct?
Correct. But can I explain?
Mr. Lally will, I'm sure, let you explain. At this point, I'm going to be asking the questions, if you
Okay.
don't mind. Your Honor, I would offer into evidence as full exhibits both P and Q for identification. Just the face sheet.
Is there an objection?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, the objection sustained.
May we approach?
Okay?
Could I see those, please, Si?
Okay, I've placed a photo before you, Sergeant Goode. Do you recognize what that depicts?
Yes.
What does it depict?
I believe that's a photo of a piece of a taillight.
Okay. And when you say a photo of a piece of a taillight, you're obviously referring to a piece of a taillight allegedly found at 34 Fairview in Canton?
Yes.
Now, that photo is the photo that is included in Exhibit Q for identification that you previously saw, right? That's the second photo, is it not?
On the second face sheet that he gave me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. And I'm showing you, if I may approach again,
Yes.
what has already been marked Exhibit 20A. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
That's the berm from that morning.
Okay. And Exhibit 20A is the photo that was in the first version of your report, which was P for identification, correct?
Yes.
I can take those back from you, sir.
You're welcome.
Just do it like that. Where's the envelope? Right here. Can you set that up? Published the two photos, I'm sorry. With regard to the first photo that you identified, which was the piece of taillight that allegedly was found at 34 Fairview, that was a fair and accurate representation of that photo, correct?
Yes.
All right. May I offer that, Your Honor?
Okay, there's no objection, Mr. Lally?
No, Your Honor.
Okay?
Exhibit 42.
22. Okay, and I'm sorry, the exhibit number was?
42.
42, thank you. May I publish 20A and 42 separately for the jury, Your Honor?
Okay?
Okay. 20A is, you've testified, the photo of the berm that was included in the first version of your police report, which was P for identification, correct?
Yes.
All right. Let's put up 42, please. No. I'm sorry. Where is 42?
Right here.
I don't have it.
Oh, you have it.
Yeah.
No wonder. Sure. Okay. The exhibit sticker's upside down, but there we go. That is the photo of the piece of taillight allegedly found at 34 Fairview that you have identified as Exhibit 42, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, having seen those photos, one was included in P for identification, one was included in Q for identification, correct?
Yes.
Which you've previously identified as your reports. Or report, I should say.
Yes.
All right. Your Honor, I would offer the top portion of P and Q for identification as a full exhibit.
Okay, and there's an objection from the Commonwealth?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. It will come in, when the jury actually gets it, we'll have it on the same 9x12 paper that everything else is.
Perfect.
And all exhibits go through Madam Court Reporter.
Oh, of course.
So, jurors, I'm going to send you out for 5 minutes, okay?
Close your notebooks, you can on to the seats. Gather all your other belongings, follow me, all rise, jury out. I'm just going to gather.
Your Honor, can I have P and Q marked as the next exhibits in the trial?
Okay. Thank you.
And with the court's permission, I'd like to display these one above the other.
Okay.
Okay. Sergeant Goode, you have previously testified about the details in these reports. You would agree that each of these reflects your report. It says Reporting Officer Sergeant Sean Goode, correct?
Yes.
Each of these is page 1 of your report, correct?
Yes.
You've previously testified that you call that the face sheet of the report, correct?
Yes.
Each of these has the identical incident number and call number, correct?
Yes.
The identical date and time reported, correct?
Yes.
The identical report date and time, correct?
Yes.
And of course, the identical officer.
Yes.
Other than the print date of the face sheet of your report, one appears to be in January, one appears to be in October, the major change is the photo that's included on the face sheet, correct?
Yes. Can I explain why?
So that second photo with the piece of taillight that is included on the first page of your report, that photo is not from January 29th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
You never took a photo of a piece of taillight on January 29th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
You never saw a piece of taillight at 34 Fairview on January 29th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
Did you personally switch the photo on the face sheet of your police report?
No.
Do you know who did?
So whoever updated the report, their supplemental, you add photos.
But in answer to my question, do you know the specific person from your department who altered the photo on the face sheet of your report?
I didn't take the supplemental report, so I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know who took the photo.
But given that this is your report, you're the reporting officer, you are responsible for the content of that report, are you not?
For my report, yes, not other officers' supplementals to an investigation.
All right, but this is your report. This is the face sheet for the reporting officer, Sergeant Sean Goode, is it not?
Yes, on the face sheet.
All right. Now, would you agree with me that someone reading this report and seeing that the date and time of the report is listed as January 29th of 2022 at 8:24 a.m., that's when you wrote it, correct?
That's when I logged in, yes.
Somebody reading that and seeing a photo of a piece of taillight might believe that that photo is from the same date that you're writing the report, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Do you think it's misleading to include a photo on the face sheet of the report when the report is dated January 29th, 2022, and the photo is not from that day, it's from sometime later?
Objection.
Sustained.
Is there anything on what is now marked Exhibit 44 on that face sheet that indicates the date and time that that photo on Exhibit 44 was taken?
No.
Is there anything on Exhibit 44, that face sheet of your report, that indicates that it applies to some supplemental report that was later filed?
No.
I may have a moment.
Yes.
Nothing further, thank you.
All right, please take the exhibit down. And we need that exhibit, Mr. Yannetti.
Oh, yes, of course. We have two others as well,
Okay, the exhibits are to remain up here with the clerk.
with the clerk.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, go right ahead, Mr. Lally.
Thank you. So Sergeant Goode, turning back to some questions you were asked yesterday in regard to Christopher Albert and whether or not he was a town selectman, is that correct?
Yes.
And he is currently, is that correct?
Yes.
And was he on January 29th of 2022?
No.
So he was elected to the Board of Selectmen subsequent to this date that you've been talking about, January 29th, 2022, correct?
Yes.
Now, the location where you were directed to where Mr. O'Keefe had been located just after 6 a.m., where was that in relation to the property line between 34 Fairview Road and the home next door?
If I had a guess, probably 10, 12 feet to the property line.
Now, you were asked some questions about having been to that residence at 34 Fairview Road prior. And you indicated that you had been there years ago with Sergeant Lang, is that correct?
Yes.
And what was that in regard to, sir?
It was a hit and run investigation.
And who, if anyone, so why were you at that residence at 34 Fairview Road?
So there was a call for a motor vehicle crash at the corner of Dedham and Washington Street. And the suspect vehicle had fled the scene. Officer Lank was my partner that night. He followed the oil spill of the vehicle down Dedham Street, up Cedar Crest, all the way down to the intersection of Cedar Crest to Fairview. And the oil spill actually drove into 34 Fairview, where we found the vehicle.
And who, if anyone, did you, through your investigation, who, if anyone, did you associate with operating that vehicle?
That'd be Tim Albert.
And was Mr. Timothy Albert, was he charged in reference to that incident?
Yes, he was.
And do you know approximately when that was?
It was in 2009. I don't know the exact date, but I know the year.
Now, as far as your report, you asked a number of questions about that. I'm sorry, before I get to that, you had testified earlier that when you were leaving the scene, there was an amount of snow that had compiled on your windshield, correct?
Yes.
And after leaving the scene, what if anything happened with the snowfall sort of throughout the course of the day?
Our windshield was completely covered. We had to take time, clear off the windshields. It had snowed considerably.
And then following that, throughout sort of the course of the rest of the day and the afternoon, what, if anything, did you observe about the snowfall at that point?
It continually got worse.
Now, as far as your report is concerned, what you were shown and what you've seen, has there been any change as far as your narrative in reference to who you talked to, what they said, anything of that effect?
No.
You've been asked a bunch of questions about what you've called a face sheet. Can you explain to the jury sort of what a face sheet is and sort of how that comes into being?
Easiest way, it's the top sheet of the report. It's not the actual meat of the report. It just gives you the date and time. Usually, if you can fit it on the front of the sheet, it would be the first party would be involved. If there was a suspect, defendant, and that's it. It would be their name, date of birth, social security number, all of their personal information.
So, as far as you were saying, sort of the meat of the report, it has no real relation to that, correct?
Correct.
Now, you were handed two exhibits or two parts of the report, and you were told to ignore the date that they were printed, correct?
Correct.
And so, what, if any, significance would the date that they were printed have in relation to what's on a face sheet?
So, in this case, there was supplemental reports done after the 29th. So those reports were added to my initial report. You can add a supplemental narrative. So if that includes meeting new people, talking to other people, or taking photos of anything you found, you would add that to our report, and it would be documented in the supplemental.
And you had offered, I believe, a couple times to explain to the jury sort of why a photo might be different from one face sheet when it's printed versus a subsequent date when the face sheet is printed. Can you explain to the jury at this time sort of why would that be different?
So when that face sheet was printed, if photo number one was the top photo, and now there was a new photo added, that could be now the top photo on that face sheet when it was printed.
And how would that be something that someone would physically go in and do, or is that something that sort of within the system automatically occurs? If you know.
I don't know how the system numbers the photos. So we added our photos on January 29th, and then any photos subsequent to that were added. I don't know how the software would put them 1 through 20 or how many there were.
Nothing further on.
Okay,
If I might,
very briefly.
you had just talked about how Tim Albert was charged as a result of the investigation that you did years ago, correct?
Yes.
The evidence in that case, you would agree with me, was strong against Tim Albert for that crime, was it not?
For leaving the scene? Yes.
Sure. Sergeant Blank actually was able to follow the trail of fluid from the accident scene right to 34 Fairview, correct?
Yes.
And Tim Albert admitted that he got nervous and left the scene, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, despite the fact that he was charged, are you aware that the case was just flat out dismissed upon restitution?
Objection, move to strike, Your Honor.
The objection sustained.
Nothing further.
Jurors, you're to disregard that.
All right, you're all set, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor.